Let's bring in now Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's the former FDA Commissioner and a CNBC contributor with us nightly for our visit. Doctor, it's good to see you yet again. You tweeted earlier today in terms of going back to work, quote, "We're not going to be fully prepared. There is going to be risk." How much risk should we be willing to face?
Well, it's inevitable that there's going to be risk, and there's a possibility that you can see a resurgence in cases once we start going back to work. I think different parts of this nation are going to start slowly introducing activity on different timetables, and I think the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, is likely to be slower. I think you're likely to see activity in this region start up sometime late in April, maybe even into late in May, maybe even into June, while other parts of the country contemplate it sooner, probably early May, mid-May. Because different parts of the nation face different levels of risk. But in regions where there were large outbreaks and epidemic spread, you look at New York, you look at Miami, New Orleans, Chicago, Detroit, I think those cities are likely to go back later. I think you're likely to see activity start up probably sometime late May, maybe even into June. So they're likely to continue the social distancing much later than other parts of the country.
Do you believe nationally that we're in a strong position? As the president said this evening, there was a Washington Post story today that said a CDC and FEMA draft memo warned of, quote, significant risk of resurgence of the virus with the reopening and a, quote, large rebound curve if mitigation efforts are relaxed too quickly. Is that a big concern of yours as well?
It's absolutely a big concern, but I think you're likely to see a very staged approach to any reintroduction of activity. So when you think of what the reopening is going to be is a staged reintroduction of activity that's now curtailed. And I think what we need to do is introduce activity slowly. Businesses aren't going to bring back all their employees at once. And then you take pauses to assess whether or not you're seeing an increase in new cases as a result of reducing the social distancing. I think one of the concerns, or a couple of the concerns, is we don't have all the tools in place that we want to have in order to, reduce the risk as much as we can. So the tools that you would want is very aggressive surveillance with diagnostic screening. We're not going to have that. And you also want the ability to do good track and trace. What that means is when you have cases that you identify, track down people that might have been in contact with that individual, get them tested, monitor them to make sure they don't come down with infection, and also isolate, ask people who have the infection to isolate so they can't continue to spread it. We're not going to have all the resources to do that in May. We're not going to have it in June, though, either. So, we might have it by the fall. So inevitably, at some point this summer, we're going to start reintroducing activity before we have everything we want, before we have the optimal system.
In terms of how things may look on the quote-unquote other side of things, you also tweeted about that. You say activity is permanently altered until we get a vaccine. A lot of people are not going to have confidence to get into crowded spaces, you said. I'm going to be more cautious. I'm not going to travel unnecessarily. So this is going to take a long time to get back to any semblance of normal, Doctor.
I think that's right. I think it's going to be a new normal. I think that there's a lot of things that we're going to do differently, and it might actually increase productivity. I think you're going to see wider use of teleconferencing and Zoom calls, Zoom board meetings. I think some of that's going to be here to stay. People are going to be more circumspect about traveling. People are going to be more circumspect about going into crowded spaces purely for entertainment. I think people are going to look to go out to dinner and go to entertainment closer to home. Because you're going to trust your local community more than you might trust a community that you're not familiar with, and you'll know if something's spreading more likely in your local community than going into a big city. So I think you're going to see life change a little bit. In some ways, we won't be the worse for it, but in other ways, certain things just aren't going to come back the same way that they were prior to this. I mean, I think you're likely to see sports played for a long time without fans in the stadiums.
That's a good segue to my next question. The Los Angeles mayor tonight, Eric Garcetti, was said to tell high-level staffers that in-person sporting events and concerts could be on ice until 2021. You agree with that?
I think it's a possibility. I mean, different cities are going to have to make different decisions, but, if a city doesn't have the capacity to do good screening and doesn't have the capacity to know whether or not the virus is spreading within the region, monitor people as they go into a stadium, that's going to be more circumspect, bringing back people into a big stadium when you don't know what's going on in the background of your city. I mean, optimally, we would have a surveillance system in this country, or a medical awareness system, if you will, that we would know if there's outbreaks within a major city. You'd be testing enough people on a routine basis that if there were hundreds of cases within a city, you would detect it. And so if we can have that kind of system in place, I think then we can get back to more of the activity that we're accustomed to and that we want to get back to. But if we're not aware where this is spreading until there are hundreds or maybe thousands of cases within a city, that's a bigger risk to try to bring groups back together in that kind of a setting. I think the system I'm describing we will probably have by the fall. We're not going to have it by May or June. I'm hoping as we go into the fall and the winter, when the risk increases, that we can start seeing a renewed epidemic of this virus. We start to have those kinds of tools in place.
Scholars at Harvard today said we may have some degree of social distancing for the next 2 years. Are we ready for that?
Look, I think people are going to be more cautious in their actions. A lot of the reconditioned behavior, if you will, when practiced on a wide scale, is actually going to reduce the risk of the next epidemic. People just taking simple precautions around hygiene, personal hygiene, cleaning of shared spaces, avoiding crowds, wearing masks in public. I think masks are going to be more commonly used in our society. There's a lot of things that we're going to do differently, and when practiced on a wide basis, are going to reduce the risk that this virus spreads. It's also going to reduce the intensity of the flu season that we're likely to have this year. And that's another matter. We should probably be very aggressive about getting people flu vaccines, because if we can reduce the incidence of flu going into the winter, then it's going to be easier to detect outbreaks of coronavirus, because what's going to be a challenge going into the winter is when coronavirus is circulating alongside flu. Remember, Scott, we're not going to get to 0 cases. We're going to have cases of coronavirus every single day until we get to a vaccine, and then probably after we get a vaccine. So this isn't going away. It's something that's going to circulate at low levels, and we just have to mitigate the risk as much as possible and try to reintroduce as much of our normal lives as we can.
That means many people and jurisdictions are going to be looking to you for your expertise for a long period of time, which is a good thing that will have you on board thinking about all this. And lastly, on a personal question, on that note, there was a report that said you looked to go back to the administration on a temporary basis, but that the paperwork got bogged down in the vice president's office. What can you tell us about that tonight, Dr. Gottlieb?
Well, I can't speak to the paperwork. I've been in discussions with the administration about assisting them in various ways, and I continue to work closely with them. I continue to have friends in the White House that I talk to on a regular basis and try to provide counsel to. A lot of the stuff that I'm talking about with them privately is the stuff that I'm publishing publicly, so it's out there for public view. But I'm going to continue to try to help them in any way I can. Are
you actively looking to go back, even in a temporary role, to help out in getting back to business, if you will?
Well, right now I'm advising them in a more formal way as a member of the Reopen task force that they announced yesterday. But a lot of what I'm doing is just providing counsel related to the things I'm writing. I'm going to continue to do that. I think that's the role I'm likely to play going forward, at least for the foreseeable future. And I hope I can be helpful to them, as well as the governors. I'm working with a number of governors, also trying to provide as much counsel as I can.